Hello and welcome back or welcome to the channel. I'm Loudguns and today we're just going to be doing a short video to put some PvE combat metas to the test. As of patch 323.1a, a lot of folks are relying on laser cannon builds for PvE bounty hunting and mercenary missions. But after some testing, I'm now thinking that ballistic cannon builds should get more of a look in, particularly for ERTs and the highest level of Vaughn missions. So if you're up for a bit of science, then grab a cup of tea while I roll the intro, then let's get into it. So let's start with a bit of a hypothesis. There are obvious positives to energy weapon setups over ballistics, primarily having infinite ammo versus limited ammo. For anyone who's just a bit newer to the game, energy weapons like laser cannons and laser repeaters have a magazine depending on your ship's capacitors, but this will recharge in a short period of time, whereas ballistic weapons have a finite amount of ammunition dependent on the weapon itself. Once you fire it, it's gone. This means that energy weapons will be the superior option if you want to prioritise sustain, and avoid having to take trips in between bounty targets to reload. However, ballistic weapons tend to offer slightly higher DPS, and most importantly, have a percentage chance to bypass the target's shields. This is particularly important when it comes to ERT missions, and the highest level of the illegal Vaughn missions, where your targets are always going to be 4 relatively large ships with high shield HP pools. These missions have identical targets, so from this point on I'm just going to go with saying ERTs to simplify things. In an ERT, you will always have a main target who will be flying one of the following: a hammerhead, an A2, a redeemer, or an 890 jump. They'll also be accompanied by 3 escort ships who will be flying a mix of Constellations, Corsairs, C2s, M2s, Starfarers, Caterpillars, and 600Is. So the good news here is that you don't have anything particularly manoeuvrable or hard to hit in the list, like fighters. And this means that, be they laser or ballistic, cannons are a good shout, since you benefit from high alpha damage and you don't suffer much from the downside of slower projectile speed versus repeaters. But the bad news is that each target is going to represent something of a tank, particularly in terms of shields, since every ship will have at least one large shield. With the exception of the A2, the main targets have especially deep shield pools, with the Redeemer bringing 2 large shields, the Hammerheads 3, and the 890 jump sporting 2 capital class shields. These have just shy of 775k HP each. For this type of work, I do lean strongly towards larger ships myself, primarily the Constellation Taurus. Not only does this equip 4 size 5 guns, giving it a hefty amount of pilot controlled DPS, but it also has enough cargo space on board for the loot that represents the biggest element of payouts from these missions. So when we move on to the testing just now, that's the ship that I'm going to be using. So now it's time to put our theory to the test, and conduct a bit of time to kill testing with the 3 different loadouts I'm going to look at. Connie number 1 has my old favourite of 4 Omnisci 15s. Connie 2 has 4 M7As, a different type of laser cannon, while Constellation 3 has 4 ballistic Deadbolt 5s. For target practice, we brought in a stock loadout C2 to represent the escort ships, and an 890 jump to trial things against the worst of the main targets. This is going to represent optimum conditions. Static target, static gunner, 1 kilometer out with all the shots landing in exactly the same spot. So against big targets, we benefit from only having to take down 1 of 4 shield facings, and take 1 section of the hull down to 0 HP to soft death the ship. In the interest of keeping things balanced with the energy weapons, I'm going to have full power to guns to give me the biggest possible magazine size, and then I'll fire them dry and let them recharge fully each time to get the quickest movement. On the C2, there wasn't a huge amount of difference to choose from between the sets. The Deadbolts dispatched the target the quickest in 21 seconds, but the M7As only took 4 seconds longer at 25 seconds. While it doesn't sound like too much, the Omniskis were notably slower at 39 seconds though. But the real gap opened up when it came to the 890 jump, given that huge shield pool from the capital class shields. The deadbolts cleared the target in just under 1 minute, clocking a time to kill of 53 seconds. The M7As came in at just under 5 at 4 minutes and 50 seconds, but the Omniskis took an age at 12 minutes and 56 seconds. But keep in mind that this is all a perfect controlled environment, and in reality you're going to be faced with more challenging circumstances. Unlike our TTK testing, enemy ships have this annoying habit of moving and shooting back. And this means that in an actual fight, you might end up wasting shots, switching between different shield facings as the enemy ship evades you, or janks around like a wild bumblebee because it's Star Citizen. The two ships I've come to semi-dread when it comes to PvE are the 890s and the Redeemers, the former because of the mega shielding, the latter because of a somewhat more manoeuvrable, smaller target that has a tendency to flip its shield facings more and force you to work through 2 or 3 before you can actually take it out. Its own ballistic weaponry also means that the longer you take to pop it, the more damage you're liable to take yourself, meaning that even if you are using an energy-based loadout, you'll need to pit stop to repair more often. And when you're taking incoming fire as well, you might have to factor in taking evasive action to recharge your own shields, and this will give shields time to regenerate for the enemies as well. The advantage here with ballistics is that the damage you've done to their hull will be permanent, even if you have to evade for a while before turning to finish them off. The downside to the ballistic loadout of course is the additional pit stops that it requires. When using my Connie, I found that on average I was using about 60% of my ammo to take down all 4 targets in the bounty. So in order to ensure that I definitely had enough for the next one, I had to pit stop in between each and every mission. My preferred hunting ground is the Crusader system, and since I was mostly doing the illegal missions, Seraphim Station itself was off limits to me, so I used the ground sites on Yela and Daymar primarily. I managed to get my pit stop time down to around 2 minutes from start to finish, i.e. starting in orbit around the moon, ending back at an OM point from which I could proceed to the next mission. And I did find that on average I was saving a fair margin more than 2 minutes per bounty versus my laser cannon loadout, so overall it did improve my efficiency. However, it is worth noting that pads aren't always 100% reliable for restocking, and that if you've got precious cargo on board, particularly if you're running around with a crime stat, that stopover at a ground outpost is going to create an instance where somebody could jump you. One thing that I did try was a switch to the Corsair. This, to be fair, is a total Marmite ship, and it's not generally one that I like using all that much myself. But with 6 deadbolts as opposed to 4, I did find that on average I was using comfortably less than 50% of my ammo, so I could fit 2 missions in between each pit stop. The big downside for a solo player versus the Connie though is losing the additional cargo space of the Taurus, but if you are pairing up with a mate who's running a dedicated cargo ship behind you, then this could definitely be worth considering. And my other key takeaway from all this testing was really seeing the light in terms of the difference between the M series and the Omniskis. As much as I love saying Omniski, the difference in terms of DPS and TTK is just too much to continue using them for this type of work. They do have a big advantage in terms of projectile speed, but if you're out whale hunting with these ERT missions, that's really not a big drawback, and certainly not enough to justify me using them. So I hope you enjoyed the video and got something useful out of it. If you did and you think I earned it, then please do consider hitting like and subscribing to the channel for more. If this is of interest, then we'll definitely proceed with doing more of this type of testing and explaining why we favour certain weapons in future patches. A big thank you to my science team, Ravnak, Sylar and Synth, for helping me out bringing ships for me to blast away at. They kept themselves entertained while I was at it. And if you would like to get involved with a group, then you are of course most welcome to hop on over to the Frontier Community Discord. You'll find the link in the video description down below. Even if you're more used to playing solo, it can just be great to have people to bounce ideas off and learn new stuff from. But with all that said, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.